Right. I think we will do a little bit start. Today we have a very special guest. It's Bjarte Bogsnes. For me, he is the man behind the Beyond Budgeting concept. I read his book like 11 years ago. And for me, that was really an eye-opener, how you could do things differently. So Bjarte has a background from companies where he has implemented and also led the Beyond Budgeting concept. You have a background both from finance and HR, which is not that common combination always. But you have also written several books. You also have some rewards. And today you run your own business, Bogsnes Advisory, and I think you are a very popular keynote speaker. And I also know that you work as a Beyond Budgeting coach. So please, Bjarte.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. Nice to be here. I've been looking forward to this one. And I think today you are a group of people where some of you have heard me before and some of you have not, which is also always a challenge because what should I present? So to those who have heard me before, yes, there will be something that you have seen before, but I've also got some new stuff for you. I want to introduce the viable map, and I will come back to that. So let me share my slides. And okay, can you see my slides?
Yep.
Good. So the author Douglas Adams, he once wrote that I might not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I ended up where I needed to be. And I'm sharing these words because that's basically the story of my life. I have a financial education, and my first management job in a company that today is called Echinor, used to be called Statoil, one of Scandinavia's largest companies. My first management job, head of the corporate budget department back in the early 80s. So I think I know what I'm talking about. I've been heading up more budget processes in my life than I want to be reminded about. But I changed my mind many years ago. I've been working with Beyond Budgeting now for close to 30 years, actually before there was anything called Beyond Budgeting, and heading up this in two large European organizations. First, a petrochemicals company called Borealis, and then later, as you heard, in Echinor. And I left Echinor with a heavy heart 2 years ago to be able to work full time on this stuff because there's such a massive interest in this. I come from a teacher family. My mother, my father, my sister, all teachers. So I was the black sheep in the family because I went for business studies. But given what I'm doing now for so long, I maybe feel I'm back in the fold. And I also married a teacher. That also compensated a bit. Anyway, Beyond Budgeting. Every time I discuss Beyond Budgeting with executives, finance people, others, there's one word that keeps coming up over and over again, and that is the word control. And the context is, of course, the fear of losing control. And when I hear this, I ask people, okay, can you please explain for me, what are you so afraid of losing? And after people have said cost control, many actually go quiet. They struggle with defining what they are so afraid of losing. So I checked up in Oxford Dictionary, how do they define control? And they call it the power to influence or direct people's behavior or the course of events. And what does this mean in organizational terms, in business terms? Well, it basically means two things. It's about controlling people and controlling the future. And behind these two lies the two main assumptions behind traditional management. Number one, you can't trust people. Number two, the future is predictable and plannable. And I hope we can agree that this is not true. This is illusions of control, which we are challenging in beyond budgeting. Of course, you can manage people, but if people are managed in stupid ways, hopefully they find a way around in order to get their job done. And when it comes to the future, the only thing we know is that we don't know, right? Which can be hard to kind of accept, but that is simply the way it is. Talking about people, trusting people, I've always traveled a lot, still do, and the first thing I always check when I enter the hotel room at night is what kind of clothing hangers do they have? Is it the one at the top with a hanger, or is it that stupid one at the bottom, which is a hassle to use? And how come some hotels offer us these stupid hangers at the bottom? I think we all know why. This is about a few stolen hangers with a hook. And what was the response? It was about punishing everybody because somebody did something wrong. Actually, one of the problems with traditional management. Wise people out there have very much agreed with what I just have said. Good old Peter Drucker, most of what you call management is about making it difficult for people to do their job. And I couldn't agree more, because sometimes the problem is that we manage too much. And when it comes to planning the future, predicting the future, especially in big organizations, there was another wise man that you also probably heard of, Russell Acumen. He compared a lot of the corporate planning he observed. He compared it with a ritual rain dance. It has no effect on the weather, but those who engage in it think it does. And again, I can also relate to this because I've done a lot of dancing in my life through all the budget rounds I've been heading up. The dancing was great, I think, but I'm not sure it really had a big impact on the performance of the organization. And to the extent it had, that impact was probably negative and not positive, as I will come back to. Okay, so much for wise people. Imagine an organization that 100 years ago invented a fantastic machine, which was state-of-the-art and key for the success of this organization. And 50 years ago, this machine started to make some trouble, didn't work that well. And today, this machine is completely broken. Kaput, it looked like this. This is not a true story, because in real life, hopefully, people would have done something 50 years ago. Either try to fix this machine, or even better, try to invent a new one, because innovation is something we all love, right? Innovation is fantastic. We all want to be leading edge, unique, right there in the forefront, better than everybody else. Great. But there is also something called management innovation that we shall talk about today. Exploring, embracing new ways of leading and managing. And management innovation, is that great? Oh no, that is scary. Kicking out the budget, are you crazy? The consequence of this is that it's very crowded on the left-hand side. Everybody is into that innovation in some form or shape. Management innovation, on the other hand, is not yet a crowded place because it is scary. But this is actually good news for brave companies who dare to embrace also this kind of innovation, because you can get just as much competitive advantage out of management innovation as you can get from technology innovation. And there are companies out there who openly say that we have no advantage whatsoever in what we produce, in what we provide, what we sell. We find it in the way we lead and manage. And I've got a few examples for you a bit later. So this is all about performance, right? Getting a competitive advantage. So that is an important word. That is why we should go beyond budgeting, because it is good for performance, defined in the right way, as I will come back to. So I will talk more about that important word. But before that, I want to talk about something else, namely budget problems. And before I continue, I've got my grandchildren staying, so I need to know, is the noise from them, which I can hear very well, is it coming through to you or not?
No, we don't hear it.
Okay,
no.
Okay, then I'll continue. It's okay. So, budget problems. this is a very long list. This is a very time-consuming process, making budgets, following up budgets. And by the way, when I talk about budgets here, it is more than cost budgets. It's more than project budgets, right? This is about the broader finance definition. We are also talking profit and loss budgets, balance sheet, cash flow, and so on, the broader finance definition. But that doesn't reduce the problems. Very time consuming. I did a session with a French car producer in Paris some time ago. Do you know when their budget process started? In March. Do you know when it was finished? In March, the year after. Maybe that's why we call it the annual budget. I don't know. Anyway, they realized they had a problem. Assumptions quickly outdated. I mean, how on earth can we sit in the autumn and predict what next year shall look like? For those having completed the 2024 budget, well, you know something about the future that I don't know. This is a serious problem. Budgeting can stimulate what I would call at least borderline unethical behaviors. The lowballing, the gaming, the sandbagging, the resource hoarding, the frenzied December spending. This is not the kind of behaviors we would like to see between colleagues. But at the same time, I'm not blaming anyone for behaving like this, because they are just responding to the system that we have designed for them to operate within, right? So if we want to change behaviors, as you probably all know, it is not about fixing people, it's about fixing systems, and that will change behavior. And that is what Beyond Budgeting is doing. It can create these illusions of control. Of course, it might feel very comfortable to have next year described with 1 million details and decimals. But again, the only thing we know is that we don't know, right? So if we don't have control, whatever that word means, it might be better to acknowledge it, accept it, and act accordingly, than to think that we have control, to fool ourselves and act accordingly. Budgets force us to make decisions too early. We have to decide in the autumn, the year before, what we shall do next year, what it shall cost. And in larger organizations, too many of these decisions are taken too high up. That doesn't always improve the quality of decisions. Budgets can prevent us from doing stuff that we should have done, but we can't because it's not in the budget. And maybe this also can work the other way around. Could it maybe sometimes lead us to do things that we shouldn't have done, but it is in the budget and it is spend it or lose it? And linked to this, I fully accept that the cost budget can be a very effective ceiling on cost, but that is just half the story, because that ceiling is just as effective as a floor, right? In the sense that these budgets tend to be spent for the reasons we just discussed. And to define good performance as hitting the budget numbers is a very narrow, mechanical, and sometimes a completely irrelevant way of defining good performance. Right? I mean, is it good performance to hit your cost budget if you should have spent more, if you could have spent less? Is it good performance to hit your bottom line budget if you could have done better? As two examples. So we need a richer, broader, and more intelligent performance language. And last but not least, one problem that not too many have on their problem list, I've called it conflicting purposes. I'll come back to that problem. It's an interesting problem because it's both a problem, but it also represents some solutions to many of these others. So I'll come back to it. But if you disregard the last one, are there any of these problems that you haven't experienced or observed through your career, in your working life? And I can't see your faces, but I would assume that there's a lot of kind of nodding heads out there right now. This is stuff that you recognize. And if so, you are in good company, because I've been sharing this slide of problems with hundreds of thousands of people around the world in the many years I've been working with this. And almost everybody out there agree. Executives, finance people, managers, others. At the same time, most organizations still continue doing stuff they admit isn't very smart, even if that is changing these days, as I will come back to. And that's interesting. And I've been thinking long and hard about why. And I have a theory. it could be that these problems are regarded more as irritating itches and not symptoms of a bigger, more systemic, deeper problem. But that is exactly what these problems are, symptoms of a huge problem, which is also a paradox. Because first of all, here we are looking at quite old management technology. Are you aware of how old budgeting is? It was actually invented roughly 100 years ago. And guess who the inventor was? James O. McKinsey, the founder of McKinsey Consulting. I never met Mr. McKinsey, but actually, I don't think he was an evil man. I don't think he had any bad intentions. I think his intentions were the best. He wanted to help organizations perform better. This was management innovation 100 years ago. And I'm sure it worked pretty well 100 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago, but no longer today. Today, this way of thinking, this way of leading, this way of managing is doing exactly the opposite. It has become more of a barrier than a support for getting the best possible performance in organizations. And that, my friends, I would call a pretty big problem. And why is this? Because things have changed. Things have changed in the world around us, and things have changed within organizations when it comes to employees. The world around us, our business environment, a lot more volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And of course, I mean, if we take this VUCA level seriously, it must have implications for how organizations design their management models. That should be quite obvious. And the other reality we need to reflect on is not external, it's internal, but just as important, what kind of employees do we generally think that we think we have on board? And I guess you're all familiar with Douglas McGregor and his Theory X and Theory Y, which is unfortunately still as relevant today and as when he wrote his book about this back in 1960, The Human Side of Enterprise. And again, these positive and negative views on employees, this Theory X, well, most employees are a bunch of potential thieves and crooks, and unless we manage them all tightly and keep them on short leashes, they will all run away, do a lot of stupid things and spend money like drunken sailors. Well, you won't find those words in McGregor's book because those are my words, but I think that's what he meant. And then you have this much more positive view, Theory Y, that most people actually want to perform, want to do a good job, want to be involved, want to be listened to, want to be treated as adults. And of course, our view here should also heavily influence what kind of employees we believe we have on board. And if we combine the two, it could look like this, with traditional management down in that lower left-hand corner, with a conscious or unconscious view that the world is still a predictable, plannable, stable place, and that most people is on the X side. If we disagree on that, which I hope we all do, then this is not the place to be. Then we need to move up in that upper right-hand corner by addressing both dimensions. On the leadership side, and by the way, what we need to get out of traditional management, I have used the following words to describe. And I recall when I wrote these words, somebody told me that, or I said to myself actually, that Bjarte, don't be too hard on traditional management. Don't overdo it. But again, I've been sharing these words with so many people all over the world, and it is a bit scary from time to time, all the looks you get that I only can interpret in one way. So what? Isn't this the way it has to be? And then I'm talking about target groups like senior managers, executives, finance people, but also some others. Again, maybe there was a time when this was more the right thing to do, but again, things have changed. So a few headlines on what we need to do on the leadership side. No rocket science, you will all be familiar with this. More purpose-based, more values-based, less rules-based, more autonomy, more transparency. And transparency is an important word in Beyond Budgeting, which I want to say a little bit more about. Because transparency can actually be quite an effective control mechanism, a social control mechanism. And you might have heard this story about Roche, the Swiss pharmaceutical giant, who today is on a beyond budgeting journey, by the way. And some years ago, they made a very interesting experiment, which was thoroughly documented. In the pilot, they kicked out the travel budget, all travel rules and regulations, and replaced it with full transparency. So with a few exceptions, everybody could see everything. If you traveled, to where, did you fly, sleep, eat, cheap or expensive, open for your colleagues to see, and vice versa. And guess what happened with travel cost in that pilot? Came down through a very simple self-regulating control mechanism. This was about tearing out pages in that rules book instead of doing the opposite. But there is a but here. Transparency is a very powerful mechanism. So if it becomes naming and shaming, then it doesn't work. That is why we should always position transparency more from a learning perspective than from a control perspective. I mean, how can we learn from each other if everything is secret? So one little tip here, some of you might know that we like so-called league tables or kind of performance standings in beyond budgeting, comparing performance internally, externally. And if you do this internally, one way is to only publish transparently those who are above average and not those below. Let everybody being below, let them know that they are below, but that their names are not, or units are not listed. But that means that they all know who they can contact that are above average that they can learn from. So you get the learning without the shaming. Last but not least, internal intrinsic motivation as opposed to external intrinsic motivation. And since this is an agile people session, I don't need to tell you that there is no area where there's a bigger gap between what most research is telling us about motivation and what most businesses are and organizations are practicing. And I'm talking about the stupidity of individual bonuses, one of the most flawed management ideas out there, after budgeting, of course. And I don't need to tell you what the research is telling us, but you all know mastery, purpose, autonomy, belonging, and so on and so on. Anyway, a number of organizations out there, they have actually good intentions on the leadership side, people side, at least if you look at what they read, what they say. But it doesn't help to have these theory Y leadership intentions if you have theory X management processes, which is the case in so many organizations. So again, if we are serious about these intentions, that this must be reflected in our own management processes, meaning that we typically have to change our management processes. And not just to make them more theory Y oriented, but also to make them more VUCA robust. And again, a few headlines of what this means. Well, the traditional detailed budget has to go because it represents so much of what we find in that lower left-hand corner. When we shall set targets and goals, to the extent we shall do that, because a very interesting discussion in beyond budgeting is, do we need targets always? And the answer is actually no, but we don't have time for that discussion today, but we shall challenge everything we do. But if we have targets, could we learn something from football? Soccer. I have yet to meet a football/soccer team who says that the ambition for next season, well, that is 45 points and 47 goals. They don't think like that. Those are budget goals. They think instead in terms of doing well against peers and hopefully better than everybody else. And that relative thinking can, in some cases, be relevant also internally in organizations and externally between organizations. Again, not just for driving performance, but also from a learning perspective. When it comes to the rhythm of all these processes, why on earth shall everything circulate around the fiscal year of typically January to December? From a pure business point of view, that period is very often a completely artificial construct. So when it's possible, when it makes sense, organize your processes on a more business-driven, more event-driven rhythm. So one example, why should all performance evaluations take place around year-end? Well, If the reason is reward, well, I think that is something to reflect on. Anyway, when it comes to performance evaluation, we cannot reduce performance evaluation to comparing two numbers, actual versus budget, and then conclude. We need a richer, broader performance language. And this, my friends, was a very high-level, short introduction into what is beyond budgeting, addressing both leadership and management processes in order to become more adaptive and more human. I'm on purpose not using the word agile here. This is business agility, but I've been looking for words here that will be even more sustainable than some of the words that are very popular today, like, for instance, agile and business agility. They might not be as relevant 25 years ahead or at that much used, but we will always talk about adaptive and human. Some functions, some people find the people and leadership discussion a bit difficult, especially finance people, more comfortable working in this vertical dimension around management processes, rolling forecasts and KPIs and whatever. If that is the case, you can still get benefits from beyond budgeting by only working in that dimension. But if you want a full benefit of this, then you need to address both dimensions. And that is why we so strongly recommend finance and HR to work together on helping the organization implement beyond budgeting. Then it becomes so much more powerful and so much more likely that you will succeed. A number of companies, these are the principles and the full model. 12 principles and a very important tagline: performance the right way. Beyond budgeting changes how we define performance, how we deliver performance, how we evaluate performance, and how we reward performance the right way. I will not go through anything in detail on this slide now, but I've got a few general reflections. If you look at what we say on the left-hand side about purpose, values, transparency, autonomy, and some examples, I mean, this is not unique in any way. I mean, you will hear agile people talking about the same. You will hear many other communities, models talking about the same. But very often, many of, especially kind of communities models which are kind of purely leadership oriented, they have often not reflected very much about what kind of management processes are needed to activate these good leadership intentions. And that is what we are doing in Beyond Budgeting, having this dual equal focus on leadership and management processes, because you need to look at both. And there has to be a coherence between the two, between what we preach on the left-hand side, what we practice on the right-hand side. And two classical examples of the opposite that we find in so many organizations. It doesn't help that we talk loud and warm on the left-hand side, principle 4, autonomy, about how fantastic employees we have on board. And we would be nothing without you. And we trust you so much. But not that much. Of course, we need detailed travel budgets, right? This is hypocrisy. And the words on the left-hand side become hollow because the management processes speak 10 times louder than what we practice, than what we preach. So what we do 10 times louder than what we say. Another classical example, doesn't help that we talk equally loud and warm about collaboration and team and everybody in the same boat, if everything we do on rewards is about individual bonus, right? Poisonous gaps between what is said and what is done. These principles are principles. This is not the recipe. So what this should mean in an organization, that depends on that organization's business, culture, history, and also what kind of issues and challenges they have. So, so if people are looking for the recipe, then, well, they would need to go somewhere else. We are not saying that we don't have practical recommendations. We have loads of them coming from companies who have gone beyond budgeting, implemented and tested and learned and shared many great practices. So we have them, but again, you need to think about what should this mean for you instead of copying everybody else. You can be inspired by others, but don't copy. This is not the Spotify model to be kind of blindly copied, just as Ati said. Two classical misunderstandings around beyond budgeting, both linked to principle 9. Some think this is just another way you're managing cost because of the name. Well, it is, but there are 11 other principles here. This is a pretty complete leadership and management model. Second misunderstanding, well, beyond budgeting, no budget, I can spend whatever I want. No, that's not what we are saying. Cost will always be important and money will often be a constraint. Because of that, we need more intelligent, effective ways of managing cost than what Mr. McKinsey could offer us 100 years ago. And that is what beyond budgeting also is offering. And I don't have time to go in detail about that, what that means today. But again, trust me, just read our books and what we write. We've got loads of practical recommendations on what can be done on the cost side. A number of companies are today on this journey in some form or shape. And again, I could have talked about fantastic cases here for the rest of the day and tomorrow, but we don't have the time. And many of you have heard me talk about a Norwegian company called Miles in the upper left-hand corner. Many have heard me talk about a Swedish bank called Handelsbanken, who had a fantastic journey, started out by this guy, a bank without budgets, targets, individual bonus since 1972, since 1970, and performing better than the average of its competitors every single year since 1972. I'm not going to spend time today on the Miles story or the Handelsbanken story because many of you have heard them before. I want to dive into a different company here. If you look just below Handelsbanken, you see below Roche, you see a company called David Lloyd Clubs. It's a UK company. They are into it's fitness clubs, high-end fitness clubs, mainly based in the UK, but also quite some clubs in Europe. And I met this company in, I think it was in October 2019. By January 1, this company was up and running. And guess what happened in 2020? The pandemic. And what do you think the impact was for a company being in the kind of fitness business? Disaster, potential disaster. This company not just survived, they are today doing better than ever. And I think they were very happy that they had beyond budgeting up and running. And they actually copied some of the elements from Handelsbanken. You know, they don't have bank branches, but they have local clubs. And they do a lot of benchmarking between clubs, actually more on non-financial stuff than financial stuff. So creating these league tables, as we call it in Europe, and often without targets. Nobody likes to be laggards. That drives performance, but also this strong focus on learning. So showing the kind of lower performing clubs, who can you learn from? They also did something interesting with the rhythm of the process. Think about it. At what point in time do most people sign up for fitness clubs? That is on January 2nd, when the club is open after New Year, right? Which means that if you want to make investments to have the club in good shape before all these people are signing up, you can't have a process where these investments are approved in December or maybe early January. So they have, instead of operating with an annual cycle, they operate with a 4-month cycle. So 4 month, 4 month, 4 month. And the one that covers December does not end with December. It has December in the middle, right? So that cycle and the cycle before deals with investments to make sure that these are ready. And then the other cycles has a different focus driven by the nature of this business. So again, a fantastic example of also using the kind of cadence here to do something with the management model. David Lloyd is owned by a UK private equity company called TDR Capital. What do private equity companies have in common? They buy companies, slash cost, and sell off. TDR has a different philosophy. They look for what they call under-managed companies. And they buy these companies and they help them improve how they lead and manage. And they came across Beyond Budgeting some years ago, got very interested, and wanted this out in all their 30 companies. Not by force, by strongly encouraging them. And we managed to get some of them started before the pandemic. For the Norwegians in the room, or Scandinavians, Hurtigruten, which is this, it's a kind of cruise company. And also, if you see a little further down in the middle, further down below David Lloyd, Stonegate Group, which is the largest pub company in the UK. You won't see in their name so many pubs, but they own a lot of chains. Anyway, again, a number of companies on this journey, and we've also had some emerging very interesting cases in the public sector. And that is a logo that is on its way onto this list. They have been a bit shy about what they've been doing, but this is the public sector unit in Norway responsible for kind of social services, labor, and so on. It's called NAV. NAV has 12 contact centers around Norway. And again met these guys in 2019. And in 2020, they did an experiment. They said to 2 of the 12 centers, you can operate completely without the cost budget. No cost budget at all, no constraints, almost. You can spend whatever is needed to do a good job, but not more. And when 2020, if you wanted to recruit people, you still needed to have a talk with a level above, but not, I mean, you could do this at any time. They didn't have this annual personnel budget where everything was decided in the autumn the year before. So when 2020 was over, they could look at the results. This was the first year of the pandemic, so everybody had lower external cost, but no one had higher cost reductions than the 2 pilots, minus 50% in both. They became braver from 2021, 6 of 12, and today all 12 contact centers are running without traditional cost budgets. So this is the first big case we have in the public sector. We might get another one because there is a municipality in Norway called Sogndal kommune, 12,000 employees. They want to become a pilot for Beyond Budgeting in Norway. And the guy responsible said, I don't want to run a successful pilot, and afterwards all the bodies around us come banging us in the head with the book saying that the law says you need a budget and kind of kill the pilots. So these guys have instead spent a lot of time securing approval from all stakeholders around them, and there are many. And they now have got the green lights from everybody, and they are ready to run a pilot. I can't wait to see the results. Amazing story. Anyway, that was some cases, and again, good old Dr. Welander. Let me finish with the viable map. You might have heard about the business model canvas, Alex Osterwalder. A great way of describing and discussing, designing business models. But a business model is not the same as a management model. And so far, there has not been a canvas for a management model until now. Now there is one built around the Beyond Budgeting principles. This is actually the front page of that book. It is just out, and at the bottom you can see where you can get hold of it if you should get interested after I've finished these slides. And the model is built upon the Beyond Budgeting principles, and we start by stacking them slightly differently. Then we move on with reflections, as we did earlier, about the world around us and about people. So we think about our business environment. Is it stable or volatile? And to what degree do we need flexibility in our management processes? So if you operate in a very stable environment, it might be not a problem that your management processes are more in the kind of fixed budgeting oriented mode, but that it cannot be the case if you're on the volatile end. Then again, on the people side, where are most employees? And try to make this as fact-based as possible and not just assessment-based. Where are they on this X to Y axis? And we used on purpose here type or trait instead of theory, because, you know, theory X and Y is kind of this view that we have about others. And then again, I mean, if most employees are on the X side or close to that, you need a management model which is more centralized, more command and control features than if they are of the opposite side, where you need a more distributed model. Having done this and then agreed on where are we in the external context, internal context when it comes to employees, then you can start to map your management model across all the 12 principles. And then you can use this to discuss, I mean, what is a management model? Because it is a fussy label if people are, I mean, it is easier to discuss a business model than a management model. But the beyond budgeting principles model gives us a framework, a scaffold for that discussion. Then you can use it to describe your management model, and this organization just did. Then you can use it to diagnose, are there any issues here? And well, let me hint at two. There are two outliers here on principle 1 and principle, and when it comes to organization a bit, to autonomy a bit further down, and also to design a better way. And the map as such look like this. And again, your yellow stickers, that and where they are placed, that represents your management model. This is an exercise that can be run at different levels in the organization. In the executive team, business units, also further out, can be useful to run it at different levels to see, does the organization have a common picture? And if there is disagreements about where we are in the team, you can also use different stickers with different colors, so that there actually is room for having a variety of positions on the same principle to get that disagreement up on the map, so that it can be discussed. If all of your stickers that fixed column that you see, this red column, if everything is in this column, that is what we call budgeting, which is about budgeting in a broader sense than finance. It is the kind of the budgeting mindset of command and control. That is the kind of the fixed. That's our definition of fixed. Anything to the right of that fixed column, which here is labeled in green, we call beyond budgeting. So beyond budgeting is not necessarily about having everything all the way out to the right, because where we should be, that depends on the context, your business environment, your people, right? So what is more important than how far out are you to the right is what is the coherence here vertically between these stickers. That is what makes your management model viable, that there is coherence. And again, here you can see some examples of not being very coherent, and that is issues that must be addressed. So that is basically the viable map, no rocket science, but we are very hopeful that this is something that can help companies in implementing beyond budgeting, because you get a much more kind of structured discussion around the totality of the management model and a better understanding of what the management model is. So that was marketing for one book. Here's for another one. I think this is the one that Ingela, that you read. Maybe it was even the first version that had a blue and white cover. This is the second edition that came out some years ago, and it has more about everything, more cases, what we did in Borealis, There's a chapter about beyond budgeting and agile, and also a chapter about implementation advice, which I didn't have time to talk about now. But again, this book has a kind of normal length. What is that, 250 pages, whatever? That is a problem for busy executives with limited time to read, right? So my last book, which is just out, is on purpose much shorter, so that busy executives can have time to read it on a short flight or listen to it on a longer car ride, because this book is also out in an audio version. And I'm extremely proud that Gary Hamel wrote the foreword, and also that the book has endorsements from Rita McGrath, Dave Snowden, Julian Birkinshaw, and also the head of Buurtzorg that you might know in the Netherlands, Jos de Blok. So that was my session. These are my coordinates. If anybody wants to follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, highly appreciated. I only write about this stuff. There are no cats and dogs, not even my grandchildren, I promise, only Beyond Budgeting. And also check out the website of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable. This is an international network of companies, individuals interested in Beyond Budgeting. We have been running for 25 years, since 1998. We organize meetings every half year. The last one was in London. The next one will be in Zurich. Check out the website. And this is also the link to my website if you're interested. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I look forward to your questions and comments. I'm sorry about the rush. I know I've been talking fast, but this is a big topic for 45 minutes.
Yeah. Who would like to go first? Thank you very much, Bjarte. Yeah, Eleonora, who wants to go?
Yes, I raised my hand just so I will not jump in. Okay, so I just want to ask, you said something, I have two questions, but just this one is more important. Why is I call it BB, Beyond Budgeting, why is it that Beyond Budgeting to be successful in an organization, it depends on finance department working with HR together?
Well, of course, in the end, the executives must both kind of own this and lead it. But to get this started, I recommend the two functions, because as you saw, this is not just about finance. This is also about people and leadership. And you can't have the two functions. You know, I've been worked in both functions, and unfortunately, in so many organizations, these are like cats and dogs. They talk a lot about each other, not much with each other. And I know what's said on both sides, because I've been on both sides, and it's not very nice. And that is a problem, because if these two functions have conflicting messages around conflicting philosophies out in the organization, then nothing happens. That is why they must talk together and work together.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, because I know that finance don't really like to do their things with HR, but I think I wanted to kind of get clarity, but that really is important. Thank you.
Absolutely, very, yeah.
Thank you. We have Christian.
Yes, thanks for a great presentation. I really love the viable map. Maybe quite similar to the previous question. I wonder, I've seen several times when I've been part of development organizations, R&D organizations, etc., where people and management at that or in that organization really thinks that beyond budgeting makes sense, and they really agree with it. But they usually is part of a larger organization. They could be a smaller company that is part of a bigger company, and so on. And what can happen is that these organizations are part of a bigger constraint regime, both formally and how they set rules for budgeting and for how to set individual bonuses, etc., that they can't control, and also that it could be part of a kind of a resilient culture around that. And so these people, what happens is that there's not even a place for conversation about this with those that set those constraints. And that could lead to, I've seen even, it happens that people then tend to get into a state of learned helplessness. They kind of have to unlearn all these great ideas because otherwise they couldn't motivate to go to work. So they would just turn insane or just leave the company. So do you have some reflections on how to make these people get some hope and to find a way to get to create a place for conversation with those that needs to be part of it?
Yeah, we do. We often meet the situation you describe. Heads of subsidiaries, business units, they would love to do this, but the group is saying no. Then our advice, we've called it up with the umbrella, because we would argue that the room to do something, the autonomy to do something is often bigger than what these managers think. Because when stupid stuff is coming from above, you don't always need to turn around the same day and let this stupid stuff and requests and requirements kind of pass all the way through your organization. Instead, I mean, if you like this stuff, up with the umbrella, use typically your finance function, sometimes your HR function, to feed the big system so that they think they get what they want. But internally, you try to practice as much as this as possible. It's not ideal, but it's much better than not doing anything. Of course, what's even better is if you can be allowed to be a pilot, right? Because then you have kind of the permission to do this. But sometimes it's easier to kind of be forgiven that you get that permission. So up with the umbrella, and then this will have a positive impact on the performance of this organization, the engagement of this organization. That will show up in numbers, not just financial numbers, but engagement numbers, and then corporate might get interested.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Richard. Yeah.
Thank you, Bjarte. Great speech. You showed us a lot of successes and success companies using beyond budgeting, but I also think you have met a lot of companies that had tried to implement it and done lots of wrong things. So what would you say would be the 3 biggest no-nos or mistakes that you shouldn't do when trying to implement this?
A good question. And I mean, this might sound too good to be true, but actually very few companies go back once they have started. I don't need one hand to count the number, but we do have some on the list. And what do they have in common? Typically 2 things. Either a significant change in top management at the very early stage of the journey, with a bunch of new executives being completely cold on this. We've seen a few examples of that. The other is what we call a flawed implementation. And a flawed implementation, that is typically 2 things. Either going only for rolling forecasts, because I didn't have time to talk about that, but the budget has 2 different purposes: target setting and resource allocation. And when you go rolling forecasting, you also need to think about how will we now do target setting and resource allocation in this new model. The other mistake is a flawed case for change, or a too weak case for change, a kind of unclear and kind of not very anchored justification for doing this. So the organization needs to fully understand, why are we doing this? What are the problems we are trying to solve, and what are we in general trying to move towards in terms of being more adaptive and more human? So again, change in top management team or flawed implementation would be the 2 main reasons.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. Stefan.
Yeah, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for a great talk, Bjarte. It was really interesting. Heard it about 10 years ago, maybe, but still good. So I was just wondering, what's your experience from the real estate or civil engineering sector? Because that's usually quite traditional and rigid.
Well, our experience is first of all that the problems I was talking about, that budget problem list, that is just as relevant across different businesses, activities, sectors, even into the public sector, as I talked about. It's a very generic problem list, but also the model itself is kind of relevant and suitable across businesses, even if they have operate in different business realities. Of course, the fact that the culture might differ when it comes to being more or less conservative can make a difference. But I mean, and we get that question a lot about cultures. But if you look at that list of companies, I mean, there are companies in China, Japan, Brazil, and so on, in companies with US, very different kind of business cultures and views upon this stuff. But there's always a pool of different thinking people, even in these cultures. So the other thing is that we often get the question, who else in our business is doing this? Tell me who else is doing it, right? And that's interesting, because if we were talking about some kind of technology functionality or product that this organization were about to get hold of, they would want as few as possible others to be into this. They want to be unique, right? The moment we move to management innovation, the mind turns completely around. Then you won't do anything before everybody else is doing it, and then you're doomed to be a laggard, right? So that's also a kind of reflection I have when you ask a question. But I mean, the short version is this is relevant for everybody, not just the problems I talked about, but also the solutions I've talked about.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big thank you to you, Bjarte. I don't know if you can see the chat, but it's a lot of positive comments.
Thank you.
So it's always a pleasure to listen to you. And I also like the slide with all the companies who do the beyond budgeting, and to see how that slide is growing. Some units too, I think. We will share Bjarte's slide, and we will also share the recording in a mail to you. So I say thank you for today, and hope to see many of you on our next webinar in the end of January.